a really good friend of mine, a Big Ten alumni, Sparty Dog in the house. Jemele Hill is able to join us. Thank you for taking the time to come on board and join us. I know you got a busy schedule. You big time. You traveling the world. You doing all this stuff. But first of all, I ain't talk to you in a minute. How you been? What's going on?
I've been well, and I hope you're not going to ask me that same question about the Celtics, because I was like, I also need time to think about it.
No, I'm going to put you on the spot on that because you've been around it too long. So you're quick on your feet. I know you can give me something. But just real quick, before we get anything else, just give us a little background. What's going on with you, what you're doing, what you're working on?
Well, I'm working on a lot. I'm executive producing Colin Kaepernick's documentary, which is directed by Spike Lee, which where we made really good progress with that. And hopefully you all will see it somewhat soon. I also will be launching a new podcast in the fall. And so, and I'm working on a children's book that's coming out next year. So I got some things that definitely will be keeping me busy, and plotting a TV return, but I got to keep that a little hush-hush. I got to keep that little hush-hush for now.
Just throwing out, TJ, you hear that? Just throwing out the little nuggets of...
She tried to bury the lead in that one.
Yeah, right? Like we were going to not talk about it. But listen, thanks for coming on. And, of course, this is a big reason why I wanted to get you on, just from your journalistic background and perspective. There's been a lot of talk and chatter, as you know, and you've been all over the circus talking about the WNBA, Caitlin Clark, whether she should be on the Olympic team. I just wanted to dig into, from your perspective, because you're one of the ones that have covered and followed the sport for quite some time. So you have a better understanding of the growth, some of the pains, but also some of the, I think, the gains that have happened over the last 5 to 6 years. Where are we at in terms with the WNBA and its growth? And kind of walk us through kind of when you saw the change of it start to elevate.
So just to give everybody some background, so the WNBA was actually the first professional team that I covered. My first job out of college, I was a reporter at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Charlotte had a WNBA team. They were one of the cities originally awarded with one. They were called the Charlotte Sting. And I was covering a lot of women's basketball at that time in general, because you had 3 very good college teams in Duke, North Carolina, and North Carolina State. They were all like top 10 teams at the time that I was working in North Carolina. So I did a lot of things in women's basketball very early in my career. And obviously, as I covered more men's sports, me covering it, I didn't do it as regularly, but always watched, always paid attention, always kept my contacts and resources in the league and in women's college basketball. So I bring that as institutional knowledge to this discussion. And so what I would say is that people have to remember when the WNBA first started, it was like a huge marketing push. It was, you look back at some of what the games were drawing, because they were on NBC. Like, they were drawing like 1.5 million people watching the games. So it actually started in a really good place. And, obviously, I think there's been some ups and downs since then. But one of the more inflection points that doesn't get talked about a lot was COVID, because that's when you saw a lot of WNBA games and their ratings, again, took a leap. They had gone down, they took another leap, and there were definitely stops and starts at various points. And so sort of since then, it has been like a steady uptick. Now, obviously, once you bring Caitlin Clark to the league, things take off on a totally new, unprecedented level than what we've ever seen. I think it's fair to say, like, she's the most impactful women's basketball player that we've seen in maybe generations, just with her ability to draw an audience, her playing style, which is totally part of the modern day playing style, the logo threes, something obviously that people see in the men's game all the time. We know how infatuated people are with the 3-pointer, given the fact that I think now we're at a point where people would kind of rather see the 3-point contest than probably see the dunk contest at NBA All-Star Weekend. So she's bringing all of these very new elements, to the game. And the WNBA is generating a lot of media attention that it didn't before. It always deserved to have this media attention when you look at the skill set, the icons that have come through the game. But sometimes the media needs to be drugged into covering something by a personality, by a rivalry, by whatever, the same way the NBA took off with Magic and Bird. It's very similar with her and Angel Reese. And so we're at a really good, healthy point in terms of attention and eyes that are on the league. The unhealthiest parts of this are the debates and the conversations that I think we're accustomed to seeing to some degree in men's sports, but they're now making their way in women's sports. But the difference is, in some cases, the people that are now talking about the WNBA haven't been there, don't have the institutional knowledge the same way they automatically have with men. And one thing that you see that is very much the difference is that, like, there are literally commentators who sort of brag about the fact that they haven't been watching and brag about the fact they don't know anything about the league, and that's considered completely acceptable. I can't get on anybody's airwaves and talk about how much I don't know about the NFL or the NBA. It doesn't work that way for me. But men are able to do that. And so some of these narratives and conversations are being shaped by people who, again, don't have the same institutional knowledge. Like, you don't have to know everything that ever happened in WNBA history, but you do need to know some key things that happen the same way I need to know certain key things that happen when I'm talking about the NFL or the NBA.
Jemele, is it fair to say, excuse me, and you talked about this, the excitement in which Caitlin brings to the table, the timing of it, the three-point shooting, kind of like when Steph got in the league, it was guys that were more athletic, that did more things, that were dunking the basketball, but because he brought something a little bit different, that's what the media tended to focus on. That was the excitement. Kids got into that. Is that more so the case with Caitlin? Because what she was able to do in college by shooting from the logo, it was a lot different than posting up inside or hitting a layup. Is that the part that a lot of people are missing from a marketing perspective of why she's kind of looked upon a little bit differently, because she's viewed differently of how she played the game and what she brought to the table?
Narratives and stories matter. And I do think she has that same every woman quality that Steph does. Like, most people wake up knowing they will never be LeBron James. You're not going to be 6'8", and you're not going to be 260 pounds and be able to handle the ball like a guard and have the passing ability of Magic while also being extremely athletic. That is called hitting the genetic lottery. Steph is an everyman, right? It's like, he's 6'2", he worked really hard. He was in highly recruited, he went to Davidson. This is all part of his kind of underdog narrative and why a lot of people love watching him play, because they can imagine themselves working hard enough in their backyard, using their hoop, shooting threes from the street and beyond. They can imagine themselves actually developing that skill. They can see it. And it's the same thing with Caitlin Clark, is that, yes, you may never be able to have the footwork of A'ja Wilson, the athleticism, but maybe you can be able to shoot from the logo like Caitlin Clark. So that's a very big part of the appeal. Look, when we're talking about marketability, there are certain boxes that you need to check. One, she's good. Two, she broke records. She's a generational talent. She plays a modern style that hasn't been necessarily highlighted in the women's game, because the women's game has very much been, it's actually been kind of a dominant big woman's game, right? Like, you look at Candace Parker and A'ja Wilson and the names, and Lisa Leslie. These are the names that have dominated. And of course, you have Breanna Stewart and Diana Taurasi and others, and certainly guards have too. But a lot of what goes on in the women's game happens in the paint. That's where a lot of the dominant players have been. So there is something to be said for that. But it's also narratives. She's from Iowa. This is a place that, while they certainly have a basketball tradition, they're not used to being on the national basketball map the way that she brought them onto the map. And that in itself gives it an underdog quality. She's from the Midwest, and a part that's not always talked about as being sexy and cool. And, so when you have somebody like, I think it was Travis Scott that showed up to her game in Iowa, like that's a huge sort of cultural marker for this entire phenomenon. And then you add, as I said, and I know a lot of people thought it was controversial, but I don't think it's controversial at all, is that, yes, you check all those boxes, and she's straight and she's white. Yes, this all makes up for what is considered to be a marketing phenomenon for a lot of people. Now, maybe the more interesting question to ask, and one of my former colleagues said this, Bomani Jones, who's a good friend of mine, is that maybe the question to ask is, like, why did it take a Caitlin Clark for all of this to pop off in terms of the conversation, the interest level in the WNBA? And that's a whole nother discussion onto itself. But it's very easy to see why she has become the story in basketball America right now.
But I think also, too, and you talk about this, is that the narrative that inside the WNBA, the players, the coaches, people who've been involved, really try to get across too is that, yes, we value what Caitlin is bringing to the table, but we've been here. We've been kind of surviving, but also thriving. If you look at the numbers based on last year, the attendance, was up 16%. The TV ratings were up 21%. They were able to get charter flights last year. That was a part of it. So, yes, it was building up. Could it be said that, and you talked about the timing of Caitlin or someone like Caitlin, that it was the timing that led to all of this conversation, and she was the right conduit to kind of bring a lot of this together?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, is that, like, it was sort of like, if you want to look at it like a football field, the ball had been advancing. They had been getting first downs. Now they got somebody who can, throw the long bomb to Randy Moss, you know what I'm saying? Like, cut half the field, right? Just take it a little further. But it is important to acknowledge, I think, as part of the conversations, the contributions of the people that were able to get the WNBA to this point. If Dawn Staley, Cheryl Swoops, and all those women who were on the 96 Olympic Dream Team, if they not riding buses and sharing hotel rooms as they tried to create what has become arguably the most dominant American Olympic sport or American Olympic team that we have, having won 7 straight gold medals. If they don't ride the bus and share hotel rooms and get paid nothing, then the WNBA doesn't happen. And so you sort of have to be able to have the nuance to be able to tell 2 stories at once. And one of the things that I love about the arrival and the presence of Caitlin Clark is that she's allowing us to go back in history, highlight those moments that led to this moment, and explain it all. And she's also, frankly, forcing a level of accountability in the WNBA, as was the case also in women's basketball, forcing a level of accountability and intentionality that wasn't always there. So it wasn't that the talent wasn't there. It wasn't that the personalities weren't there. It's that they needed a bit of a flash fire to be able to make all of this and everything about the league illuminate. Like I remind people with these ratings that you saw at the women's college basketball level, keep in mind that when Cheryl Miller, when she made her national television debut in the mid 80s, 12 million people watched Cheryl Miller play. All right. All it took is for more investment and all those things to happen over the course of a year to take advantage of somebody like Cheryl Miller. And that didn't happen. So there have been points where you have these supernovas that happen where there wasn't the investment in the intentionality. And now there is, and she's forcing them to do that. Because realize when the championship game, the women's championship game in college basketball was on ABC, that was the first time in decades it had been on network TV. As people forget, it used to be on CBS. Then ESPN took it over, and the game got moved to ESPN, the women's national championship game, and much of the tournament. And while you got more games, it's like the part of the reason why the ratings never even had a shot at being close to what the men's were is because it wasn't on network television. When you're on CBS versus ESPN, it makes a difference. And now they've done that. And so now we'll see what will happen as a result. So it's like when you get these opportunities, you have to have people in the decision-making capacity who have the decision-making power to make sure that these things are taken advantage of. And it is that is what allows the sport itself to grow.
Jemele, I think what's being lost in the conversation, too, is something that goes back to college basketball, women's college basketball, and it used to happen in the men's game, is that you were able to follow and grow with a player over 3 to 4 years. And then you developed a sense of knowledge, of knowing, of watching this player grow. And we see it in the women's game. South Carolina, for instance, and UConn, being able to follow those great teams, Tennessee, Candace Parker back in the day, and you were able to develop somewhat of a relationship with those players because you watched them grow. And that's the same case with an Angel Reese and a Caitlin Clark. We saw the battles, and now they brought that interest into the pro game. Unlike the men's game, we don't have that anymore. It's one and done, and you don't develop that. That passion now has spilled over a little bit. And I think a lot of the talk has been the fans of Caitlin Clark or the bashing unnecessarily of an Angel Reese because of what happened in college. And that's taken on a life all in itself. Even though we're talking about the WNBA, some can be negative, some can be positive. But a lot of that spurs from being able to develop some kind of relationship with them in college.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there because, in a weird way, the exploitation is going to work for the women, and by that, like the women have to stay in college, right? And men, we know it's a different rule. You know, you can be literally, as you said, one and done. So with the men's game, it's a combination of one and done, and then you having wide open transfer rules. So like every year, you don't know who's where or what's happening, and you're only following them for a short period of time. With the women, you get an opportunity to follow a complete story. And that's why when people were wondering whether or not Caitlin Clark's success in college, as in the rating success that she generated, whether or not that would translate to the WNBA, I had no doubt that it would, because in America, we do like to follow stories. People want to see how this story plays out. You know, when Magic and Bird came upon the NBA scene, Magic won the championship, but people wanted to see how is this rivalry going to play out, particularly now that we know they can play one another for championships. And it's the same with both Angel Reese and her and this entire rookie class, is that people want to see how this story turns out because they have been able to become emotionally invested over the course of time. I mean, we're out here in LA, Jimmy, so we know about Juju Watkins. Now Juju Watkins is coming to the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a feeling that her star, as big as it is now, is only going to get even bigger than it already was, because now another half of the country is going to see her play. And she's got, her game reminds me so much of Carmelo. She has amazing game. She's got a great nickname, right? Like, she's got all the tools, and she smashed Caitlin Clark's freshman scoring record by almost 200 points. She's a scorer, a dynamic, elite scorer. And so we're going to see people be able to follow that same storyline. People have been following Paige Beckers for years, and she's projected to be the #1 pick next year. So, like, those things and elements are why I think the popularity for both women's college basketball and what we're seeing at the pro level are completely sustainable. On top of adding to the fact we're about to get we're sending another dominant Olympic team to Paris.
Well, I think also, too, with the new TV deal that the NBA has negotiated for the WNBA, that infuses more cash into the league. It's all a bit of talk about losing money, but they're turning the page. And I want to touch on this real quick, too, with regards to the players of the WNBA. A lot of talk has been the jealousy part of the current veteran. Now, there's always a sense of protection. We've had it. I had to go through it, as a rookie. We see that in football, baseball, basketball, whatever it is, a young player that comes in, young players that come in, because Candace Parker had to deal with it too, her rookie year. That conversation in itself, and you've been around it, how much does that play into it? And I don't like to use the word jealousy, but it is part of the narrative with regards to Caitlin and also Angel Reese and the rookies that come in, play into maybe some of the negative conversation with the WNBA?
So my issue, again, is the double standard, right? As you just mentioned, as a player, Jimmy, you had to go through it. You probably had to go through it when you first got to Ohio State. You had to go through it again when you got in the NBA, right? It's part of the rite of passage. Whenever there is somebody new on the block, and especially if they're coming with a lot of accolades, a lot of hype, people want to know, is it real or is it Memorex? Like, is this, are you what they say you are?
Exactly.
At every level of sport that happens. And it was just kind of irritating for me to see that narrative be twisted into, oh, y'all women, because it's so easy to attach those two tropes to women, pettiness and jealousy, right? And so it's just like, oh, that's funny, because I went back and looked at what LeBron James's Cleveland teammates were saying about him when he was drafted, right? You've seen this clip, probably, right?
Carlos Boozer.
Carlos Boozer, Darius Miles. You had Darius Miles saying, I don't see any high school player being able to take us to another level. This is, paraphrasing.
Right.
And his exact words were, I hope he can get on our bandwagon. He said that about LeBron James.
Yep.
Did anybody call Darius Miles petty or jealous?
Nope. Well, they might have, but not to this extent.
They might have.
Yeah.
But not to this extent.
No.
It didn't overtake the narrative, right? It didn't become the storyline or whatever. It was plenty of players that thought that. The dude was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at 16. When he got to the league, people want to know, is he really the generational talent that people say that he is? And obviously that proved that he exceeded expectations, to be honest, but that's the same scope. But like, I want as I've said to a few people privately, I just want some of the men to talk about the WNBA and what's happening there the same way y'all talk about the guys. Right? Like you don't resort Anthony Edwards when they asked him if Jamal Murray was his role model and he said, quote, hell no. Y'all don't call that petty or jealous, right? That's what he said.
Right.
What
yeah.
that man said, okay? But y'all don't call that petty. Y'all don't call that jealous. But when you see vets in the league saying like she gonna have to earn it, yes, this is what happens. And listen, I know people will highlight the very obvious cheap shot from Kennedy Carter. Like nobody is saying that was right or that was a basketball play. It clearly wasn't. However, if you watch the whole game, which I did, those two talking trash up and down the court. Mm-hmm. They jawing, they getting physical with one another. And again, that wasn't the way she should have handled that. But if you saw the context of the game, you're kind of not surprised that happened, especially with that player in particular, who is known to have a short fuse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but they brought none of that context to the discussion. Everything was, oh, this just proves they're jealous. Nah, it just proves that she was battling with somebody who's a fierce competitor who took things too far, and this was the result. It happens 1,000 times in the NBA every damn year, and we don't have this entire broad-based discussion about people picking on a player. And so I just need the commentary around the WNBA and what we're seeing to just grow up a little bit. Because Angel Reese almost got her head taken off by Alyssa Thomas. And I ain't seen nobody talking about twice. Yep. And you know why? Alyssa Thomas, everybody knows, like she finished, I believe, second in MVP vote last year. She a real one. It's a reason why she's on this Olympic team. Okay. And so it's funny.
Facts.
Yeah, she bought that life. And it's funny because the constant complaint you hear from NBA fans all the time is it's too soft. The player's too friendly, blah, 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 blah. And what do you know? You have some of these things y'all said y'all missed happening in the NBA. And now look where we are.
It's true. Sports are better when people hate each other.
It is.
And there's real rivalries. This is what we need.
We do need, but what I love about it, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking and providing the insight, is that we're really jumping into and having these serious conversations about the WNBA. And it's more voices like yours and other women who have played the game, who have covered the game, that provide a better insight into why things have played out the way they have. And probably more so than not, Jemele, the future, where the future of the league is trending to because of the influx of outstanding young, talented women, and also the forebears who set the standard before. And you keep them involved. So the WNBA is progressing. I love to see it. And matter of fact, when my son was younger, growing up, I said, you need to watch women play. Watch them play, and you'll learn the fundamentals of the game a lot more because they're not dependent upon, even though young women are more athletic now, that wasn't the premise behind it. It was learning how to play the game. So it's in a great place. You're in a great place. When you get that TV thing going, since you already dropped the dime on us, get that TV thing. Holla at your boy, the Big Ten, Detroit, Toledo, right down the street. It's up 75. I love to be on it. But congrats on everything. Thanks for coming on and blessing us.
And I really appreciate it. And as I always tell you, Jimmy, it's like, among the many reasons we combine is that we both hate Michigan. Love it. Ohio State and Michigan State, we in one accord.
There we go.
Rich ain't here. Talk all the smack
I
you
know,
want.
yeah,
Rich, you already know. Thanks, Jemele. Have a good one. Enjoy the game tonight, too.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.